Okay, I think I'm mic'd up now, double mic'd. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I'm thrilled to be here this morning. Talk about one of my favorite topics in the world, which is mobile security. I'm going to go ahead and get it on the screen for you so you can actually see it as well. There we go. Ta-da. Excellent. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about mobile security this morning. And mobile is kind of a unique area right now in security. About 2014, 2015, we noticed that something was happening in the mobile space. We weren't really sure what was going on, how serious things were, what things were actually occurring in that space. And we kind of fast forward now to 2019 and take a look at where we are in this space. So I'm going to walk through what some of these attacks look like, what some of the tools that the attackers are using, how serious are these things, and then, of course, what can you do about it? So let's define the space a little bit. Talking about things that are beyond the perimeter. So, as mentioned earlier, Check Point made its name in the firewall space. So we did such a good job securing that actual perimeter that the attackers have decided to go somewhere else. Right? So everybody's got a next generation firewall. Everybody's kind of got the IPS box checks. They have a sandbox. What we don't have is something protecting these devices, right? So iPads and your mobile devices. My office consists of this, right? So a pair of AirPods and my phone are the two primary things that I use on a daily basis to conduct all of the activities that I do. So I get to have a really fun job, fly around the world and talk about mobile security, meet with customers and partners, and discuss what's going on in this space. And there's really two things that I require when I get anywhere. I need power, so I will plug into just about anything. And I also need internet to do my job. Without that, these two things are 100% useless. Now, I used to be a little bit of an anomaly. There was only a segment of folks that were really kind of doing a lot of traveling. Now we have these things called teleworkers. Now we're encouraged to work from home in some cases, depending upon your job function. And this is causing a significant security issue in today's landscape. And the reason is that there's not a lot of thought placed into how do I enable a remote worker, right? So normally that meant you had a VPN on your laptop, and that was it, right? You had a VPN back to corporate. You now back behind the perimeter. Life is good, things are easy. Well, then we had a bunch of folks that demand that they absolutely have to have email to do their job on their phones. And at first, organizations were like, no, we can't do that. We put up a lot of restrictions. We don't want you to have email. Eventually, they relented, right? As these things called iPhones came out, here we go. Everybody's now got email on their device in some way, shape, or form, some type of access. And unfortunately, we got there organically, right? There wasn't a policy that sat down and said, okay, how do we actually secure the email that's on this device? What emails will they be receiving? What can they actually do with these things? So the policy has lagged significantly behind in the mobile space. It's also significantly easier to attack these devices. Why? Most people have absolutely nothing on their device today. Right, so raise your hand if you think you have any security on your mobile device today. Let's just get a quick view. I can count less than 10 in this room, maybe a little bit more if I can't see everybody. So think about the population in this room, and think about how many devices you probably have. The average, by the way, is 1.5 devices per person, meaning most folks are either carrying 2 phones or a phone and an iPad. So now we have an additional attack surface that's out there in the form of these devices. And lots of times people say, I don't really do anything that important on my phone, so who really cares? Well, I'm here to inform you that it's not about who cares, it's because they can. Right? So the old Sir Edmund Hillary, why did you climb Mount Everest? Because it was there. Right? There's technological curiosity of what can people do. And they have found that this is a very rich environment for many things. And we're going to talk about what are some of the things that these people are actually after. So obviously, most of us have corporate email or organizational email, and what do I also have on here? Lots of personal information. So unlike your work laptop, This is a pretty rich environment to get information about you. This is a great way to case somebody and understand what's going on in their lives, what applications they use, think about online banking, etc. We also have kind of an attitude when we're out of the office of, I'm just going to get my job done. Right? I'm not necessarily worried about, is that USB that I plug my phone into at night at the Marriott secure or not? All I care about is I'm getting power. Right? It must be charged for my next day of work or I will be unproductive. So I'm not thinking about security when I'm plugging into something. I'm certainly not thinking about security when I log into the Marriott network. Surely Marriott secures this. Should not be an issue. I come to an event like this. I plug into whatever I can get to so I'll have faster internet service and make sure that I have power. So I'm a lot more carefree in terms of what I do. And the attackers are really focused in on the fact that you're careless outside of the office. Kind of all of that security training we've been taught. Look at the URL bar in the Safari browser. Look at where the email came from. Those habits kind of start to go out the window when we get to the mobile world because we're moving quickly. We're doing these things in an Uber. We're doing them in an airport. We're doing them at our kid's soccer game. You're doing them when you wake up in the morning without your coffee. Oops, what did I click on? What am I doing? So how do these devices actually get infected? A lot of folks want to know how easy it is. What are some of the things that people use to do this? So let's take a look at how devices actually get infected. So there's really three categories we break it down into. Number one would be malicious applications. So yes, there are malicious applications on the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. Unfortunately, if you Google it, you will quickly see how many applications are removed per year from these stores that made it through whatever security checks they have in place. In the case of Google, it's actually an automated system called the Bouncer. In the case of Apple, they personally review everything that goes into the App Store. Unfortunately, this is numbers into the thousands. In the Google Play Store, it's actually lifetime into the millions of applications that have been removed from the store. So you can't just assume anything that's on the actual Google Play or App Store is actually a good application. And in the case of Android, we'll talk about an example later, where you actually download a known good application and it turns into a bad one when you get it onto your device. Networks. I mentioned I'll connect to just about anything. It's the same behavior that most people have. It's not uncommon to go to a conference and just see which Wi-Fi access point is open, and you connect to it. How do you know if that's a malicious network or not? If you don't have anything on your device to tell you that it's malicious, you have no idea. And then lastly, something that we all kind of had taken for granted for quite some time, especially in the iOS world, is that our devices were actually secure, meaning the actual OS, meaning actual Android or actual iOS itself. Unfortunately, this has come to the forefront in the last year, right? So for those that are familiar with Google Project Zero, they actually announced 6 vulnerabilities in iOS where you can actually have your phone on that nightstand in my hotel and it would be attacked without me doing anything. And by the way, it wouldn't show up and say that I was attacked unless I had something on the device to tell me that it was attacked. So a completely silent attack taking advantage of flaws in the actual operating system. So we unfortunately can't count on Apple and Google, at least at this point, to provide us a secure platform to do so. This is witnessed by Apple actually at their Worldwide Developers Conference. Announcing a bug bounty program. So now a iOS bug or exploit is now $1 million, right? So this is a complete admission by Apple. They need some more help. By the way, these aren't malicious things. This is the natural part of IT. This is the natural part of security. So we shouldn't look at these things negative. We should just have an understanding of what is going on and what you can do about it. So let's take a look at what some of these tools look like that the attackers actually use. So Google, of course, is always our friend. And we Google, what are the top hacking apps for Android? This is the first result as of the last time I Googled it. This is the top 40 applications to hack your Android device. These are all freely downloadable, open source material that allows you to do all kinds of interesting things to devices. You also know, if you read through the text, that this is not rooting the device. So rooting is actually taking over the entire device, basically at ring 0 for those geeks in the audience. This is things that you can do without actually rooting the device. So this is actually very interesting and something that's freely available with a quick Google. We also have cables that have entered the marketplace. So this is an OMG cable. For those in the back, you can see it on the screen here and see what the interface looks like. There's a gentleman that has come up with a very clever way of hiding a Wi-Fi transmitter in this cable. So let's say you go to Starbucks and you lost your power cable. And you walk over to the table and it's your lucky day. Somebody left a power cable for you. How nice of them. Well, what they don't know is potentially somebody sitting there with that interface, ready to upload a payload to their device, right? So very, very clever, very simple, very real life. I myself have found many a cable and charger in my travels. Now, this is a pretty busy slide, but what it is it's an interface to something we call a pineapple device. And a pineapple device looks like this little guy. I can pass it around, or somebody can come up to me afterwards. You simply plug this into your laptop while you're sitting at Starbucks or Tim Hortons or wherever you are in the world. And I can spin up my own SSID, my own Wi-Fi network, my own access point. And simply, usually, I'll just name it as close to the existing access point as I can and see who will actually jump on it, right? So sometimes in conferences we play tricks and pop these up and then we put your name on the screen. Your lucky day. I'm not doing that today. But you always will see in the room, somewhere around a third of the room usually plugs into this device. Now you can see I have a menu of items of things that I can do here from this device. It's pathetically easy. I'm a sales guy and I actually understand how to use this thing. This costs $100. Right, so very, very easy, very, very simple. Our incident response team at Checkpoint actually estimates that hackers doing this type of quote-unquote low-level activity can make somewhere between 75 and 100 grand a year. So think about the fact that you have to do absolutely nothing but go to a public place and spin up an access point, and you're in business. Very, very simple, very easy. This isn't high-tech, right? This is very simple, very easy to do. So let's talk about something that's a little bit more sophisticated. So on the screen there, you see a trunk of a car. And this was actually a rental car that was rented by 4 GRU Russian agents. And they got caught in The Hague outside of OPCW. So OPCW is basically a regulatory body to not allow chemical weapons to proliferate. And if you look back in your history books in the last year or two, chemical weapons were a pretty big issue in Syria. Russians were very interested in what was going on at this organization, so they parked this rental car with their agents outside of that building, and they proceeded to use their tools. So one of them is a more sophisticated Wi-Fi antenna, or pineapple, and one of them is actually for cellular calls. So that's called a Stingray device, or an IMSI device. They're about the size of a small suitcase. They cost about $1,500, and that allows me to set up my own cell tower in this room, which is highly illegal, by the way, but I can set up a cell tower in my room, and I can have your phone, because it's already pre-programmed to go to the strongest signal, come to my tower instead of the tower outside. This allows me to read your text messages, listen to your phone calls, look at your call logs, on and on and on, right? Complete and full understanding of what's going on. So you can see these are not sophisticated operations. The technology is available, and it's very easy to do. So let's take a look at some of the common attack surfaces and what those vectors look like across there. So this is a fairly busy slide, but hang with me. What I'm illustrating here is simply that the same problem you have on your laptop computer is the same problem you have as on your phone. It's the same problem you have with these ubiquitous cloud applications, right? So everybody's using SaaS these days. O365 being the biggest, but Gmail, Box, Dropbox, Salesforce, all other very good examples of these. They all have the same attack vectors, right? So you can still be attacked via phishing, via email, connecting to malicious networks. So everybody's got something on their endpoint, but they don't have something on their mobile devices, and the attack surfaces are the same. Now, what are they really after? They're really looking for account takeovers, right? So somewhere between 70 and 80% of all cyber attacks are based on an account takeover. So how do they get that actual account? How do they get that information becomes the key question. They're looking for accounts. One of the ways they can do that is obviously with your mobile devices. So what's at stake when they actually do attack your device? Right, so number one, based on our research right now, is credentials. So everybody in this room knows that credential reuse is a big problem. That simply means that your corporate or organizational AD happens to also be the same as, say, a Facebook account or a bank account. We all know who we are. Nobody in this room as a security professional would have duplicate passwords and credentials for sure, but we all know somebody outside of this room that uses the same username and password for every site that they go to. If it happens to match something at your corporation or organization, that's a really big problem, because as soon as I steal your banking password, I now have your AD password to 365, and I can do all kinds of fun things with that. Email, obviously a huge vector. Who wouldn't like to be able to read somebody else's email? This is extremely valuable when you're actually casing an organization. Knowing and understanding the cadence, who approves what, right? Being able to read through email chains of important people provides you a tremendous amount of email, and I think there's many corporate executives have learned to stop writing things down, because otherwise, guess what? It's e-discovery and it's in the court system pretty quickly. And then lastly is more of a little bit of James Bond, but almost all of the malware that we examine and take a look at in the mobile world are taking advantage of things like the camera, taking advantage of things like the GPS. So imagine if I knew where you were at every second because of the device in your pocket. That's a pretty powerful thing. I'll be honest, you don't see it as much in the corporate world, although in specific targeted attacks you do see executives that are targeted with this, specifically if they're going to countries that are maybe not as friendly to the United States as others. So let's take a look at what one of these attacks actually looks like. So we're going to kind of walk through one. So number one, James walks in to say Starbucks. I connect to a malicious network. I thought it was a Starbucks network. It looked exactly like the Starbucks site when I signed in. By the way, I can clone it in 13 seconds to have an exact replica of the Starbucks site, just my own URL that I just created as an attacker. What I'm going to simply do is I'm going to trick them to download the Starbucks app. So I put out a little cardboard with a QR code, or I take a QR sticker and put it on there so that you can get your Starbucks stars or Chipotle rewards or whatever, insert your favorite food. I trick them to downloading the app. Now I have the ability to do a man-in-the-middle attack. So they're logging into a legitimate Office 365 site. They put in their credentials. On the left-hand side is the command and control of the attacker. You see quickly, I grab their credentials. Pretty simple, pretty easy. You also know at the top in green, there's many other things that I can do with this, right? So just because I'm only stealing credentials here does not mean I couldn't have done other things associated with this. So now I have their credentials. And what am I going to do? I'm going to do an account takeover. And by the way, I have automated software that will allow me to do credential stuffing on all of the SaaS, known good SaaS applications that are out there. So I'm going to try your credentials hundreds or thousands of times in every site I can think of to see if I can get ahead. Again, outside of this room, there are many people that use the same username and password. So now I have access to your corporate enterprise Dropbox, to your box, to Salesforce. Think about the damage that can be done very quickly by just having those credentials and doing it in an automated fashion. Let's take a look at another attack. So most attacks today are actually starting still with phishing. So somewhere between 80 and 90%, depending upon whose statistics you believe or use, they're starting with phishing attacks. Phishing attacks are simple. They're either through email or they're through messaging today. What does everybody do their messaging on? Generally your mobile device. Right, so we're going to take a look at an email attack here. We're going to send a phishing email out. Again, I'm going to grab the normal O365 phishing password reset email, and I'm going to go ahead and craft it to send it the link to grab their credentials. So looks like a normal email. You click here, put your password in. You'll notice obviously in red that is not the Office 365 login site. I just created that site moments ago. The average phishing URL is only around for about a minute. Right? So in the old days, we used to stop things with reputation and black holes and IP addresses and all those kind of fun things. That stuff's all out the window now. Right? It's ineffective because it actually this won't exist after I steal somebody's credentials. I'll actually pull it down. Therefore, I have no reputation. So I put the credentials in. Now I grab the account. What do? I do a little reconnaissance because I'm reading every email that's coming in. And I'm going to go ahead and send an email out to the CFO and say, hey, send me some money. Now, many people think, oh, well, we would catch it. You know, it's probably going to be a big enough amount. We would catch it in our purchasing process, whatever. Everybody has limits to what they're able to authorize and what they're not able to authorize. So many of these attacks could be for as little as $3,000 that are below somebody's authorization limit. In fact, I have an example of a medical device company in Virginia where 13 assistants were hit for $5,000 each for Amazon gift cards. So quick account takeover, figured out who all the assistants were and said, hey, we want to reward Johnny for a good deed. Give him a couple $1,000 or $1,000 or $500, you know, different denominations and gift cards. So the attacker walked away with some good math and some good money, well below the radar. This isn't stopping any organization. Does the FBI or police care? Sure, they care. They don't have time to work on something like this. So you're completely unprotected if you don't have something in place. So obviously game over, right? And these attacks are on and on and on. The only ones that make the headlines are the ones that have the big dollars associated with it. But remember, if I'm sitting in my basement or sitting at my local Starbucks, I can make 5 or 10 grand a day. That's a pretty good living. So that's the answer to why are they going to attack you, because they can. They can make a living off of doing this. They don't care if you're the most important person or least important person. If they can utilize your information to get to somebody else or your organization, they will. So a lot of spaghetti on the screen. I only walked through a few different scenarios of how this can actually occur from a practical standpoint. But the answer is there are literally hundreds of different ways and combinations that can be done to attack you in this space. Again, why are they attacking you there? You don't have any security on your device. You're an easy target. So let's take a breakdown of what the threat landscape looks like. So you'll see that global, about 30% of the attacks are mobile. All right, so you're talking about 1/3 of the market that's essentially being ignored right now. You take a look at the Americas, it's a little bit more. EMEA and APAC, a little less. But you notice it's very consistent. The problem that's here is the same in the rest of the world. So we have a tendency sometimes in the United States to think, oh, we're pretty good, we're pretty safe. Well, the statistics don't actually bear that out. In fact, actually we're a little worse. We're actually one of the biggest countries that does the attacking. So let's do a little bit of a breakdown between what is actual mobile malware, how bad is it, what do these things actually look like. So you'll see the biggest piece of the pie is something called rough adware. Okay, and rough adware is simply the hijacking of an ad network. So for those of us that play Candy Crush or Words with Friends, you have all those ads that kind of pop up at the bottom. The attackers just simply take over that mechanism and display their ads. So all of the money, anytime anybody would click on that, would now go to the attacker. In fact, the attackers in rough ad networks typically will put in something that's called a clicker, which will continually in the background click on that ad. You have no idea it's occurring. They're generating revenue. Now, is this the worst thing in the world that's out there? Is it the scariest thing in the world? Absolutely not. But do you really feel comfortable generating money for an attacker? Where's that money going? What else are they going to do? If they have the capability of taking over an ad network on your device, what else can they do? The answer is they can do a whole bunch, but right now they don't need to because you're not even stopping them from doing this. So they're making money by hardly lifting a finger. So there's other things out here. Generic malware is just simply standard malware, no outstanding feature to it. and you move down to MRAT, that's a mobile remote access tool. Droppers, that's the ability to leave malware on your device at any time, right? So they're seeding, if you will, devices. For those that are familiar with botnets, we're familiar with the dropper concept. And you also see banker and phishing apps. And you also see a little sliver there for ransomware. This is probably the next big vector that's out there. Imagine if you're able to lock out 12 billion people from their cell phones, how much they'll pay to get to them. So let's take a look at what some of this malware looks like. We'll break it down. This is one called Agent Smith. I think probably everybody in this room is familiar with Agent Smith from The Matrix. He had the incredible ability to continue to multiply. So in this particular case, infected over 25 million devices, 2.8 billion infections of this. So traces of this were found in different places. This is an Android attack. It was very simple. You would trick somebody to download a malicious application, right? So call it something fun, a funny video of the day application. They download that. The thing that's unique about this is it would actually move laterally on your phone and start to look at all the apps you had on your phone. And then it would download a malicious version of that app and delete the known good app. So you thought you had good apps on your device, but Agent Smith actually converted those good apps to bad apps. And then they were able to do, in this case, rough ad networks. So we'll talk a little bit about Anubis Banker. So obviously, they're always after dollars. A banker is simply a malware that is targeting bank applications. So in this case, Anubis is one that's been around since about 2014, 2015. It's actually morphed several times. For those in the banking world, you may remember something called Zeus. It was probably the most famous banking credential stealer on the PC and Mac. And in this case, they were able to actually take into account something called Android layers. So Android layers is a native functionality in Android which allows you to paint over what's on your screen. So what they do is they actually paint over the actual credential login to your bank, and you log into your credentials, and generally what happens is your credentials disappear. I think every one of us has experienced, hey, I just put my username and password in, and it didn't take. Well, if you're on an Android device, that could be a sign to you that you were just attacked, because they allow that screen to grab the credentials and they move on to the next. What's scary about this is it's become a family, and you see at the bottom there, they've actually just now added a ransomware module as well. So not only are they going to steal your banking information, they're also going to encrypt your phone with Anubis Crypt. Cryptocurrency. So obviously with a spike in cryptocurrency, maybe a spike again in cryptocurrency, who knows, became very popular to have applications to manage your wallet. This particular guy actually stole the credentials. This was not the attack that was used most recently, but there was something like this that a gentleman actually lost $24 million in cryptocurrency with an attack just as this. Now, let's move into the James Bond world. This is where the real excitement is from a mobile security standpoint and the capabilities. So you've probably read some articles where if you land in certain cities in China, they'll actually ask you to download an application. Essentially, it's spyware, and they track your communication and your location. They also have things such as watering hole attacks, where they try to redirect you to a particular site and attack your phone. And this is becoming a pretty hot button topic for most of the world from a human rights standpoint. There are many, many, many countries that are now monitoring their citizens via mobile devices. We're going to walk through a few of those examples. So one of the most well-known is a gentleman in the UAE was very outspoken against this government. And they actually sent him this text message here for him to click on it. And if he were to click on that, he would be infected by something called Pegasus. Pegasus is one of the many names for this. Every research company has to have their own name, so it becomes who is the most popular, who gets it out first to market. And what this would do would actually take advantage of 3 iOS vulnerabilities. So on your Apple device, one click, and now I completely own the phone. So now I have this gentleman's text messages, call logs, web browsing history, all of his email, what he's doing 24 hours a day. Unfortunately, this led to the gentleman actually being jailed. He's certainly currently still in jail as a result of his government's monitoring of his devices. This has become extremely common practice. So how common practice? So Citizen Watch is a human rights group that kind of started to track this information. In fact, the gentleman that received that link actually sent this information to Citizen Watch. And what you're seeing on the screen here is where they've actually detected Pegasus and portions of Pegasus. And you'll see the good old USA is listed there as well. You'll also see that the Middle Eastern countries are very fond of this technology. Now, to break it down a little bit further, they believe that there's over 36 likely operators of Pegasus. So Pegasus was developed, depending upon who you talk to, by somebody called the NSO Group. The NSO Group is actually based in Israel, and they sell this technology to foreign governments. Right? And they are on 60 Minutes, and Google them. You can find all kinds of information about the NSO Group. It is perfectly legal. It may not be moral, but that's another discussion for another day. And what they do is they're now tracking citizens or important people across the world. So this is happening. Pegasus is completely undetectable unless you have something on your device. So if you're a person of interest, you should be concerned about Pegasus. In fact, I think most people know who El Chapo is, the most famous Mexican drug cartel leader. This is how they actually got El Chapo. This is what got Jeff Bezos. Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post reporter that was dismembered in a Saudi embassy. So these are very serious consequences to mobile security. Now recently there was an update to the Pegasus attacks. I mentioned the Google Project Zero team. So this was sending a call from WhatsApp to your device. You didn't have to answer it or even see it, and it would own your device. It took advantage of that iOS hole that I spoke about earlier. So what I want you to understand is that this is evolving, and it's evolving very quickly. And as a result of the NSA tools breach, it's accelerated. It's accelerated so folks that have next to no dollars now have a very low barrier entry to do these types of things. And if you have a lot of dollars, you can do things like the NSO Group and Pegasus. Right? So it's not a very big leap to see that eventually this technology will be in almost everybody's hands. So this is why you need to be vigilant with your devices. So what we know is traditional protections are not sufficient, right? So your standard antivirus, if you were to load that onto your phone or a version thereof, is only going to catch about half. So you're missing half of the attack surface that's out there. We have these things called polymorphic attacks, which are simply just context-aware attacks. It knows what it's attacking. So let's say it's going into a sandbox or an application sandbox. It knows it's in that sandbox, so therefore it won't do something. It might decide to detonate in 10 minutes versus, say, 4 minutes. It may decide it needs to change into a different file format that particular vendor sandbox does not recognize. So polymorphic attacks are something that's on the rise. And you also see, obviously, campaign-based attacks. So many folks will say, well, I really need to worry about this portion of my security or that portion of my security. Well, the attackers have recognized that and automated that. They may start with a mobile device and move to your network. They may start with your network and go to a mobile device. So they put particular campaigns together with these elements that will push you in the wrong direction and something that you need to pay attention to. You cannot, in security, only pay attention to this. Right? You have to understand the complete threat landscape and how do you reduce your overall attack surface. So we talked specifically about phishing attacks. Whaling attacks are just simply a bigger target, right? So small fish, big whale. These are extremely, extremely prevalent in the mobile world. So let's talk about what we can do about it, right? So we're going to talk in the generic. I do work for Checkpoint Software, but we're not going to talk about my solutions. We're just going to talk about some of the building blocks that are out there. So one of the first on the scene was mobile device management. I would say 99% of the people that bought it to actually just wipe devices if you lost it. Mobile device management is actually much more powerful, does many more things, but it actually takes political will for you to exert that on your end users. So as companies went from corporate-owned devices to BYOD, or what we now call COPE, this didn't work, right? Because people weren't willing to put your software on my phone. Let's face it, we call it my phone, whether the corporation issues it or I bought it myself, it's my phone. So you're going to tell me what to do with my device. So for corporate owned, I would say absolutely you should have mobile device management. You have the right to control what happens on that device if you own it. If not, you may want to look at something like a secure container. A secure container is not a complete solution, but it is offered by most mobile device management companies, which will allow you to separate personal and work, right? So it provides a secure container for all of your work documents, all of your email, your calendar contacts, etc. Again, this isn't a complete approach, because if I own the device, meaning if I jailbreak or root the device, I can actually get into the secure container. It's actually trivial for all vendors to walk through. Again, a quick Google will prove me right. So what else do you need? You need some security telemetry to work with the containers and the mobile device management. You need something on the device saying this is in a good security state or a bad security state, right? Utilizing multiple engines to understand what's occurring on the device, how it's occurring, say it's interacting with the network you're connecting to, and ensuring that that's a proper network. Looking at the applications on your device, making sure that they're the proper applications associated with it. Making sure you're at the appropriate patch level for your phone. Right? iOS users do a pretty good job of updating. They turn on the auto updates. In the Android world, it's not that they don't want to do it. Most of them do want to do it. But in a lot of cases, the carriers have to have the actual upgrade available for their actual end users to do it. So if they're stuck at a particular version with known vulnerabilities, that's a big problem. Right? So you need to try to understand that, and you need to have something that will actually mitigate that. So for those that were in the network security world for a long time, it's kind of what you would call virtual patching, right? It's what you would do with your IPS. You didn't want to make that Microsoft update, but at least you turned on the IPS to block that particular vulnerability that was coming through. So let's talk about how to actually implement. Again, I apologize, very busy slide, but I understand all this content will be available to you. What we're looking at is how to actually roll out mobile threat detection, and this is from Gartner. They actually published their latest report on mobile threat detection yesterday. This is directly from that. And basically you have 4 different ways to put things out there from a mobile security standpoint. One is to integrate with a UEM, right? So for those who aren't familiar with the term, Unified Endpoint Management, this gives you the ability to interact with mobile threat detection. So maybe if your mobile threat detection says the device is compromised, maybe you shut down access to a particular application on the network, or maybe you shut down email. So for instance, if my device becomes compromised, I no longer have access to my secure container, right? So giving myself some risk mitigation. You also, of course, could roll out just mobile threat detection without a UEM. So for COPE and BYOD environments, this is a popular choice. We also have something we haven't talked about, but you have the ability to actually bake in this technology via an SDK to the applications that are developed. So let's just say, for instance, you're Wells Fargo Bank, and you want to make sure that when that application is interacting back with the bank, that it's in a secure state. Would you like a jailbroken or rooted device to interact with your corporate servers? I think the answer is probably no. You might put something up that says, call customer service, or maybe you can't use it today. So you can actually bake the security into the application itself. And lastly, proxy-based. So this is the old VPN. This has really kind of become out of favor because of mobile device connectivity, but it's still an option where you basically are home running all of your traffic either through a security provider or your own corporate